A wall of white hit Hester Quillen without warning, and then the world vanished. One moment the wagon was rolling through Cold Springs Basin, the oxen leaning into a bitter wind. The next, the drifts swallowed the wheels to the axles and kept right on coming. She hauled the canvas flap shut, wedged it with a flour sack, and pressed herself to the slut wall, listening to the snow hiss against the wood like something alive and hungry. Inside, the 3 children were already huddled under every quilt she owned. Clara, 12, had her arms around the boys. Thomas, 9, was trying to be still and failing. Little Ely, just 6, had his face buried in his sister's shoulder, and Hester could hear him breathing in short, shallow pulls that scared her more than the wind. She gave them 1 minute of calm voice, told them to stay under the quilts, told them the storm would blow itself out, told them she had seen worse. She had not seen worse. Then she worked the flap open, just enough to slip through. The cold was a fist in the throat. She dropped into snow that reached her hip and immediately began to dig with her bare hands along the wagon's side, trying to find the iron wheel rim, trying to find any purchase at all. The oxen were gone, cut loose when the lead animal went down and refused to rise, and the wagon sat tilted and half-buried and utterly still. She dug until her fingers quit feeling. She pressed her palms together and blew on them and dug again. There was nothing else to do. She was the only wall her children had. She did not hear him coming. She heard nothing until the rope dropped over the side of the drift above her, and a dark shape descended against the white. Josiah Hollister had ridden out into the storm because one of his fence lines had come down, and he was not a man who left things undone. He almost missed the wagon entirely. What stopped him was a flash of dark calico above the snow, a woman's skirt whipping up in a gust before vanishing again. He had a spare horse on a lead line. He spurred toward the shape. He reached the drift's edge and looked down, a woman waist-deep digging bare-handed at the snow. Digging with the kind of focus that said she had something to get to, and she was not going to stop. Even from above he could see her hands were raw. He tied off his horses and went down to her. She startled when his hand closed on her elbow, reeled back against the wagon's side, and stared up at him with eyes that were red from wind and something else. "Children," she said, just the one word. He did not ask how many. He took the short-handled spade from his saddle pack and went to work. She dug beside him with a piece of flat board she found under the wagon's seat, and neither of them spoke. The wind was too loud for easy words anyway, and there was nothing to say that the digging didn't already say. He noted that her hands were bleeding at the knuckles and she did not seem to notice. He worked faster. It took 20 minutes to clear enough of the canvas to get the flap open. 3 faces blinked out at the grey daylight and at him. "Ma." The oldest girl said it like a question and a relief at once. "Come on down. This man is going to take us somewhere warm." Hester reached up and lifted the small one, Ely, herself, pressing him against her chest before Josiah could offer. He helped the other 2 down, steadied the older boy when his legs wobbled, and said nothing. Getting them onto the horses was a puzzle. He put the 2 smaller children on the spare horse with the girl between them and told her to hold tight, and she nodded at him like she had been told harder things. He put Hester up behind him on his own horse and felt her hands close on the sides of his coat with a grip that told him everything about how frightened she had been and how hard she had been working to hide it. "Hold on," he said, and turned for home. The Hollister ranch sat at the base of a long ridge that cut the worst of the north wind. Even in a storm this size, the barn was visible from a quarter mile. Josiah had built the lantern post himself for exactly this reason. He rode straight for the light. Inside the barn he got the horses settled and the children off and onto a hay bale, and then he led them across the yard to the house at a fast walk, shielding the smallest one with his coat as best he could. The house was warm. He had left the stove banked that morning, and the heat met them at the door like a hand. Hester stood in his kitchen and looked around it in a way that made him feel seen in a fashion he was not accustomed to. She was cataloguing it, he realized, the stove, the water barrel, the shelf of tins. Counting resources, a woman who had been managing alone for a long time. "Sit the children by the stove," he said. "I know what to do with cold children," she said, and there was no sharpness in it, only fact. He put on water for coffee and left her to it. He came back from checking the barn to find her kneeling before the smallest boy, working his boots off with careful hands, bending each little toe gently, watching his face for pain. The boy, Eli, he had heard her say it, had gone pink from cold and was shivering in a way that looked productive rather than dangerous. Hester's face, though, was very still, the stillness of a woman holding herself together by will alone. "How long before I should worry?" she asked without looking up. "He's shivering. That's good. Keep his hands warm first, not hot. Water's almost ready. I'll bring a pan." She did look up then. Something crossed her face that he did not know what to do with. Gratitude mixed with something rawer. The look of a person who has been carrying alone long enough that the offer of help is almost too much to absorb. "Thank you," she said. He nodded and went for the pan. The first evening was awkward in the way that only strangers under one roof can be. He fed them from what he had, salt pork, dried beans, cornbread he mixed up rough and baked in the cast iron. The boy Thomas ate 3 pieces and then looked mortified at himself. Josiah cut him a 4th without comment and set it on his plate and went back to eating. Clara washed the dishes after supper without being asked. Josiah watched her from the corner of his eye and said nothing. After a moment he picked up a dish towel and dried alongside her, and they worked in silence that was not uncomfortable. And when they were finished, Clara said, "Thank you for supper, sir," in the careful voice of a girl who had been taught manners and kept them through hard times, and something in him responded to that with more force than he expected. He gave them the 2 small rooms off the back hall and slept himself in the chair by the stove. He told himself it was to keep the fire. Somewhere in the small hours he heard one of the children cry out in sleep, a short, frightened sound, and then Hester's low voice answering, and then quiet again. He stared at the ceiling and listened to the house breathe around him. He had not been aware, before this week, of how soundless the house was in the ordinary run of nights. He had taken that silence for peace. He was less certain of that now. By the second morning, Thomas had found the half-mended fence tool on the workbench and was turning it over in his hands with an expression Josiah recognized, the look of a boy who wants to be useful and doesn't know how to ask. He showed him how the joint fit together. Thomas paid close attention and handed the pieces back in the right order without being told. Josiah did not quite smile, but he noted it. Hester watched from the doorway with her coffee cup and said nothing, but she stood there longer than she needed to. On the 3rd day the storm broke. The sun came out hard and mean over 6 feet of new snow, and that same afternoon a rider came up the south track and tied his horse to the fence post with the ease of a man who had done it before. Rudd Fenner was a big man, thick through the chest, with a jaw that jutted forward as though he expected argument from the air itself. He had been trying to buy Josiah's south quarter for 2 years. Josiah had told him no twice and meant it both times. The south quarter sat over the best underground water in a basin, and Fenner knew it. Fenner stepped inside without knocking, saw Hester at the stove and the children at the table, and let a slow, unpleasant smile spread over his face. "Well," he said, "didn't know you'd taken in boarders, Hollister." "They're guests," Josiah said. He was standing at the far wall and he did not move toward Fenner or away from him. "Storm caught them. They'll be on their way when the roads are fit." Fenner looked at Hester with the kind of look that made her set down the spoon and straighten her spine without thinking. "Widow woman, are you?" he said. "No man to vouch for you." "I vouch for myself," Hester said. Fenner laughed. He looked at Josiah. "County's going to hear about this. Man living alone with a widow and 3 youngsters. That's talk, Hollister. I'd hate for it to cause you trouble." He paused. Of course, if you were looking to lighten your burden, some say, the South Quarter, I could make sure the talk stayed quiet. Josiah crossed the room in 4 steps and opened the door. You're done here, he said. Fenner looked at him for a long moment, measuring. Then he walked out. They heard him ride away south. Hester let out a slow breath. I'm sorry, she said. I've brought you trouble. He was already trouble, Josiah said. This just gave him a new handle to grab. But that night, after the children were asleep, Josiah sat by the stove for a long time. He was an honest man, and he knew what Fenner would do with this. The county seat was a day's ride in good weather, 2 in bad, and Fenner had friends there with long memories and short scruples. Josiah had built this place with 12 years of cold mornings and lean winters, and he would not lose it. Not to weather, not to Rudd Fenner. And he could not, he found, when he pressed on the thought, he could not ask them to leave. Not Ely with his healing toes, not Thomas with his careful hands, not Clara who washed dishes like she had been keeping a household since she was 9, which she probably had. Not Hester, who said she vouched for herself and meant every syllable. He stared at the stove grate and admitted that to himself plainly, and then sat with it until the fire burned low. He did not sleep much. 3 days later, Ely spiked a fever. It came on fast, the way fevers do with small children. 1 hour the boy was playing with a wooden spool on the floor. The next he was burning to the touch and calling for his mother with glassy eyes. Hester was at his side before Josiah had even fully processed what he was seeing. She was competent and she was frightened. He could see both at once. She knew what to do. Cool cloths, broth, keeping him still. But her hands trembled once when she wrung out the cloth, and only once, and she made herself stop. Josiah rode out at first light for Doc Aldrin in the settlement 4 miles east. The road was bad but passable if you didn't slow down for the drifts. He made it in under an hour and talked the doctor out of his breakfast without apology, and they rode back hard. Aldrin pronounced it a lung fever, not severe, caught early enough. He left herbs and instructions and a look at Josiah that said more than he put into words. The look of a man noting something he approves of but won't mention directly. Josiah sat up with the boy that night. He told himself Hester needed sleep. He told himself he was keeping the fire. He held Ely's small hot hand and listened to the boy breathe and felt something shift in his chest that he could not name and did not try to. By morning the fever had broken. Ely woke up and asked if there were biscuits. Josiah went to the kitchen and made biscuits. Hester found him there an hour later. He heard her come in and he did not turn around from the stove. There was a silence between them that was not empty. It was full of the night just past and the long week before it and something else that neither of them had said yet. You didn't have to sit with him, she said. I know it. Another silence. Josiah. He turned then. She was standing in the doorway in her plain dress, with her dark hair loose from its braid, and she looked at him with something open and quiet and uncertain in her face that he had never seen pointed at him before. Thank you, she said. That was all. But the way she said it meant a great deal more. He nodded. He put a biscuit on a plate. Take that into him before he hollers, he said. She smiled. She had a good smile, even and genuine, the kind that reached all the way to her eyes. He had not seen it fully before. He thought about it for most of the morning. Fenner came back on a Thursday with 2 men behind him and a folded paper in his coat. Josiah saw them coming from the barn roof where he had been clearing snow. He climbed down and walked to the porch and took his rifle from inside the door and held it loose in both hands, barrel toward the ground, and waited. Hester heard the horses. She looked out the window and saw the 3 riders and saw Josiah on the porch, and she did not think about it. She pulled on her coat and went out and stood beside him. He glanced at her sidelong. She looked straight ahead. Fenner pulled up at the fence and held up the paper. County Commissioner signed an order, he called. Says a man living in proximity to an unattached woman, no relation, is a public indecency. You can turn her or face a $50 fine, Hollister. You get that paper from your cousin at the county seat? Josiah called back. Fenner's jaw tightened. Doesn't matter where it came from. It's legal. It is not legal, said a voice from the road, and all of them turned. Doc Aldrin was riding up, and beside him was a man Josiah recognized, Reverend Carver from the settlement, a compact, precise man with steel-rimmed glasses and the reputation of being difficult to intimidate. I took the liberty, Aldrin said, nodding at Josiah, of consulting the Reverend this morning. He had some thoughts about that order. Reverend Carver produced his own paper. The commissioner's signature is present, he said pleasantly, but the statute requires 2 witnesses, both residents of the county. The only signature on this witness line belongs to a Rudd Fenner. He looked at Fenner. You cannot witness your own petition, Mr. Fenner. That has been the law in this territory for 11 years. Fenner stared. The 2 men behind him shifted their horses. There is also, Carver continued, the matter of Mrs. Quillen. He looked at Hester with a brief, kind nod. I am told she and her children arrived here in extremis, and were preserved from the cold by Mr. Hollister's intervention. That is a man performing Christian charity, not indecency. I would be grateful for the opportunity to say so before any judge in this territory. The silence lasted a long time, long enough that one of Fenner's riders began edging his horse back from the fence, long enough that a crow called once from the ridge and the sound carried clean across the yard. Fenner looked at Josiah. Josiah looked back and did not say anything, because everything had been said. Fenner turned his horse and rode south. His men followed. Hester let out a slow breath. Josiah set the rifle butt on the porch rail but kept his hand on the stock until the riders were small in the distance, and then gone. Well, said Doc Aldrin, climbing down with the ease of a man who enjoyed a good outcome, I believe I was promised coffee on my last visit. Come in, Josiah said, and then, without quite planning it, he looked at Hester and said, both of you. The week that followed was quieter than any Hester had known in years. Fenner did not come back. The roads cleared by degrees. Thomas and Josiah mended the south fence together on 2 consecutive afternoons and came in for supper talking about post depths and soil freeze in the way of men who had worked side by side and found they did not mind the company. Clara had taken over the bread baking and was improving on Josiah's recipe in ways he admitted, grudgingly, were correct. Eli had recovered fully and attached himself to the barn cat with a devotion that bordered on theological. Hester washed the evening dishes and listened to the sounds of the house and felt something she had not felt in so long she had almost forgotten its name. She felt safe. She was not a woman who confused safety with weakness. She had learned to drive a wagon and shoot a rifle and read a land deed and stretch a side of salt pork to last a week and a half. She had done those things alone, and she was not ashamed of them. But there was a difference between managing and resting, and she had not rested in a very long time. She had forgotten what it felt like to close her eyes at night, and not immediately begin composing the list of things that could go wrong by morning. She heard Josiah come in from the barn and stamp the snow from his boots and hang his coat on the peg. She did not turn around. Roads'll be clear enough by Monday, he said. I know it, she said. A long pause. The fire ticked in the stove. Outside the window, the stars were coming out, one by one, over the cold, dark ridge. You could stay, he said. The words were plain and quiet, no decoration on them. I am not asking out of charity. The children need a roof. You need a partner who is not absent. He paused. I have been alone here 11 years, and I am not saying that as a complaint. I am saying it to tell you I am not a man who knows how to ask for things easily, but I am asking. Hester set down the dish she was drying. She turned around. He was looking at her with the same direct attention she had seen from the first, the unsettling, steady look that did not go around a thing or soften it into something else. It was the most honest face she thought she had ever seen on a man. "What are you asking for?" she said. "A life," he said, "if you're willing." She thought of the road that had brought her here, the empty wagon seat where her husband used to sit, the 3 children depending on her breath and her nerve, and whatever scrap of luck the Lord saw fit to provide. She thought of Eli's hand in Josiah's the night of the fever, and Thomas on the fence line learning the names of things he would need to know, and Clara quietly improving the bread. She thought of standing on this porch beside him, shoulder to shoulder, facing Fenner down with no ground given. "I am willing," she said. He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and took her hand in both of his, and held it the way a man holds something he intends to keep, carefully, and without any plan to let go. Outside, the cold lay deep and still over Cold Springs Basin, the snow smooth and unbroken to the ridge, and inside the lamp burned steady and warm. The 3 children slept sound in their beds, and for the first time in longer than she could count, Hester Quillen did not go to sleep wondering how she would manage tomorrow. She already knew. She would manage it here, in this house, with this man beside her, and that was not a small thing. That was the whole of it.